Our people will, in the future, will have no place to live. There'll be millions of dollars in their hands, but that will be just, say, might just fly out their hands, but the land will always be there. So that's the way we think today. It is for the future that we are thinking, not the present or the past. We want our future generation to have a place to live.
The Yavapais have been roaming the midsection of the state of Arizona for hundreds of years. The Yavapais first came from the northern lands of Arizona, from the red rocks of Sedona, the birthplace of Montezuma's well. In time, they spread out to different parts of Arizona, from Sedona to southern Arizona, leading the Yavapais to the place we now call Fort McDowell.
When we were put here, well, I guess originally we were nomadic people. We roamed from Colorado all the way down into Mexico. And we are aware of the food source. We follow the food source and the sunlight, the good weather. We were gatherers and hunters. So that made us nomadic. We followed the food source.
The Yavapais have been through many dark years. The Bloody Basin, Skull Valley, the Death March to San Carlos, and the massacre at Skeleton Cave. In the 1970s, once again, the Yavapais would be faced with another situation that could have changed the history, culture, and the very existence of the Yavapai people. This is the story about Orme Dam.
In 1947, the first Arizona Central Project was introduced as a bill to Congress and was passed in 1968. The Fort McDowell Indian community found out 4 years later that the proposed dam would flood 18,000 acres of the community, and the people would have to relocate to Goldfield and other areas out of Fort McDowell.
There was really no way that we could fight this thing because the state of Arizona wanted it, the metropolitan area wanted it, and it didn't look good for us. And so we weren't hopeless, but we had faith and we had hope, and we just needed to get the word out. The old people said, no, we don't want it, we want the land. The land is more important. Put dirt in one hand and put money in the other hand, and open up your hands and see which ones last the longest. Of course, the soil is going to last the longest.
A lot of the old folks feel that we're really tied to the land here. You know, it's all we know. We don't know about leaving anywhere else, although we do go to some place, but we always come back. And it's the only place that I feel comfortable. You know, I can sit outside and look at the mountains, Four Peaks, and the river, and my family being involved in cattle raising. We're more closely tied to the land than most people.
The government response to the floods in the Phoenix area was to try to stop the floods. Therefore, the Central Arizona Project was born.
I heard about this when I was a young girl, but really didn't pay attention in the late 60s, like 8th grade, 68, I was in 8th grade. And as I got older into high school, I knew there was a referendum that was taking place in our community in regards to taking of our land. I think I was 18 years old then, but the referendum, of course, wasn't until later that time. So at that stage, I knew it was some involvement in us being replaced or displaced from our community, and and our community turning into a lake.
Phoenix residents were being hit by large floods that flooded out homes, businesses, and bridges. Orme Dam would have prevented more floods from happening when the dam was proposed. People in town immediately voted yes for Orme Dam. The Central Arizona project cost $1.8 billion to create. It was the largest project ever in the United States by the Bureau of Reclamation, which was a sister to the BIA. On that same date, December 26, 1972, 100 years earlier, a group of Yavapai women and children were killed at Skeleton Cave. The Yavapai people had begun to fight another battle on that same historic date, 100 years later.
Our people stood together. We fought. But we did not fight like our ancestors. We did not fight with bow and arrow, tomahawks. We fought with our mind, our pen. And today, we are still at a crossroad. Goldwater found out that we can still fight.
On December 14, 1972, a front-page story in a Phoenix newspaper triggered the tribe's action against the dam. In Arizona, public hearings were held on the Orme Dam issue. Fort McDowell had no stance, but many others did.
Well, I think a lot of the people maybe didn't quite understand. Maybe they thought, well, this is just Fort McDowell, this is just a little tribe. You know, they're not going to know. Or maybe they felt that we weren't smart enough to say, well, if we put money in front of them, they'll take it. They probably thought that way. I think that was probably what the federal government even thought way back when.
The next following days created more debate. Robert Doka, Fort McDowell tribal chairman, held a community meeting and turned it into a press conference, where many of the people spoke up against the dam.
And I know many of the people voted against it to begin with, and as time went on, some people voted for it. And I think it was based on the monetary reward or whatever you want to call it that the community would get if they moved off the land.
I just wondered how they could do this to the Indians after telling them that they would be left alone when they gave them the reservation and said that they would not bother them anymore, that this was their home. And I thought that was terrible that they would be doing this to my tribe.
In the spring of 1973, Carolina Butler, a housewife from Scottsdale, Arizona, went to Washington along with Emma Johnson and John Williams and gave the first testimony protesting the building of Orme Dam and the relocation of the Fort McDowell people.
One of the senators from Minnesota had said, well, as far as we knew here, that there's nobody there, that the Indians, not even the tribe there's not using that land. That's what they had said. And I said, and I looked at my teacher, and no, and my teacher was like, we need to get her inside. She's from Fort McDowell. He was trying to get me in there, but he couldn't. But what ended up happening was they brought a microphone outside, and they asked me, that man asked me, because the Hopi guy was good. He was telling me, no, there's Indians there. I go to school with them at Phoenix Indian, and they live on the reservation. But some of the senators didn't know that we were living on the land that they wanted to flood. So when the microphone got to me, that senator asked me, where are you from? And I said, I'm from the Fort McDowell reservation. And I said, our land will be flooded. My home will be flooded. I told him, where I live, I'll be flooded. Our cattle, people have livestock, will be flooded. Our cemetery is going to be flooded, everything. And he goes, well, we thought it was land that you guys weren't using. I said, no. He said, it's our land where we live at. They're trying to relocate us somewhere else. And one of the things they were trying to relocate us was to Salt River. We didn't want to go there.
It was upsetting, and it was sad to hear that our own representatives at the time that represented our state were telling the people there in Washington that nobody lived here in Fort McDowell, when in reality, there were people here.
But one of the most touching things in that was the cemetery. The cemetery involved all our ancestors who are buried in there right now, most of them. And we didn't want to see that inundated. And the Orme Dam group who wanted to build the Orme Dam came in and devised a plan that would isolate or make the cemetery like an island. They would build a berm around it that would allow our community members to go out to the cemetery. And I think that was one of the most critical points to the community members, that they didn't want to see the cemetery inundated.
When I had heard about it, it meant that Fort McDowell Yavapais were going to be moved again. And it was my understanding through my grandparents that our people had moved so many times and that they were told before that this would never happen again. So what was going to happen was, if we were going to be moved, we were going to be moved to a place that we didn't know anything about. The land that I understand we were going to be put on was just going to be really full of rocks and hard to plant, hard to build. So once again, I felt like, as a young person, you know, how are we going to start over again? We had just settled at Fort McDowell. We built Fort McDowell to what it was. We planted, we built homes, we built a lot of things, and that's where I grew up, here at Fort McDowell. So I didn't want to see us moving again to a place we knew nothing about.
The Fort McDowell Indians were told that Central Arizona Project was needed because Arizona was in need of water.
That's the first thing they talk about, is giving money for the land, and money is worthless. I mean, land is there forever for us.
When the government poll was sent out, it was too confusing for the Yavapai people. Emma Johnson wrote a simpler poll at the last minute.
We put a poll together, and we called it a grassroots poll, and we took it around to everybody in the community, and they signed this poll whether they wanted the Orme Dam or they didn't want the Orme Dam, if they had no opinion.
There was a period in time that Fort McDowell was going to be inundated with water at that point. Some of the research and studies that were done on that lake indicated that that lake wouldn't be full all the time.
During the floods, you know, it interrupted a lot of the traffic that lived in the Phoenix area there, south of Phoenix, where the Salt River flows through Phoenix. That's where a lot of flooding took place, and people couldn't go back and forth to South Phoenix or North Phoenix.
I guess the people that wanted it was really for the lake. You know, it was, to me, it was just for recreational. It wouldn't do the tribe any good. But I know they talked about rights to the waterfront, you know, for fishing and boating purposes, but again, there was no official, you know, agreement.
So there was, if you want to call it, an outcry from the motorists in Metro Phoenix. I guess they got tired of having to fight the floods, having to sit in traffic for hours trying to get across, trying to commute from one side of the river to the other. So from what I can recollect, that was the main issue.
Dixie Lee Davis, Angie Jackson, Virginia Mott, Kimberly Williams, and John Williams left for Washington a second time and showed the results of the polls to the United States government. The polls said that 140 people were against the dam and that 8 had no opinion. There was only one community member who was in favor of building the dam.
I don't think, well, I was living in Phoenix at the time they talked about this, and my parents were here, and they really, I think, there wasn't a place they would have liked to move to, because this was home all their lives. This area, we've lived here for 72 years.
What will tomorrow bring to the Yavapai of Fort McDowell with the visit of Mr. Watt? Will it change in their favor, the favor of Yavapais? We'll see.
And I remember the dust was just flying up, and we saw the helicopter fly in with Secretary Watt. I remember seeing Hiawatha Hood, Norman Austin. I remember seeing them, and I remember how intense it was that these officials were coming from Washington, D.C. to here, to actually take time to hear what Fort McDowell Yavapais had to say. And I remember it was a day in history, Yavapai history.
When Secretary of Interior Watts was here, I was there, yes. It was very emotional. I think only tribal members were allowed to speak at the time, and a lot of it was our elders, and every one of them were against the dam.
We were there, and Norman Austin was the chairman then, and he got up and spoke for the people, and he cried because this land, we couldn't give it up. And he was pleading with the Secretary of the Interior to go back to Washington and tell them how, the Indians did not want to move, and that they would just leave us alone.
A lot of discussions among family members. Some of those ones were probably the meeting at the one of the most famous ones known for is when Watt came into our rec center at that time. And I remember seeing the helicopter come in, remember watching it on television. Previous to that, there were many council meetings that were held that I remember talking about it and hearing about it. But at that age, you don't really conceptualize a lot of things. You know this is a lot of interest, but you hear a lot of discussion about it, but you don't really know a lot of things about it.
There was a vote taken, and believe it or not, there were tribal members that money lured them to vote, yes, let's build the dam. I don't think they really looked at the whole picture as if we do that, we give up what we had put in place for our future, we give that up and just on a piece of paper sign and take money and be moved again. I don't think they really looked at that.
It's about noon now.
I was the chairman at that time, and we got support, and somebody had to stay up front, and we went to the governor and to people in Washington, in the Phoenix area, to help support our position. And we went to the churches and asked them to march with us to Phoenix, and that's how we did.
On September 23, 1981, Fort McDowell tribal members began the Trail of Tears, a 3-day march from Fort McDowell to the state capital of Arizona.
The march helped too. We walked 3 days to the state capitol. We started with day one. My dad was the oldest one, and he led us in prayer down there by used to be the gas station, and we all walked, and it took us 3 days. And other people joined us, the churches, all the denominations. They prayed for us, and we had meetings in Phoenix, and they all came and supported us. And we walked to the state capitol, and there again, a lot of people were there supporting us. And it was just something that, we felt like we should do to show our support.
Well, I helped my family come down and take part in it, and I had a job to do, but I came towards the end of it. And I remember we all walked from, I think, Papago Park onto the State House.
On November 12, 1981, the Tribal Community and Governors Advisory Committee met. After many debates, both sides decided that Plan 6, an alternative to the Orme Dam site, was best for everyone. Governor Babbitt made the decision not to build the Orme Dam. The Yavapais of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation were able to keep their land by their determination and years of prolonged resistance to relocation.
And one thing I was told when we had our final gathering there at the Doubletree Inn in Scottsdale, we had a big party, and they said, don't ever forget that this could always come back. So you gotta let your people know, your young people coming up, that they're gonna have to fight this again in the future when there's 5 million, 6 million people in the metropolitan area compared to 2 million. And it's getting there, people. I worked for the city of Phoenix for 27 years as a water treatment plant operator. I know how much water we produced, and I started working. And when I retired, how much water we produced. And at that time, there was a little over 3 million people. Now they're talking about 6 million. Now they're talking about 10 million. by 10 million people by the year 2010. And where are they going to get the water?
You know what? There's always a chance anything can happen. You know, our Congress, our senators and congressmen, there's a lot of influence out there. It's a very scary situation. Anything could happen. They could put it on the floor of the Senate. They can put it on the floor of the House of Representatives to do that. But you know what? It's going to take a small tribe such as Fort McDowell to stand up again. During that time, we had help from other tribes too. We had all our surrounding tribes here, 21 tribes in Arizona that stood up with us too. Not only us, we not only marched, a lot of other tribes came forth and helped us. So yeah, there's a chance that could happen again. But again, it's going to take us as a strong, small Yavapai Nation to stand firm and say no.
You know, we've come a long, long ways in telling the state of Arizona, of course, the federal government, that we're not going to let anyone in our walk of life take, you know, our homestead, our homeland. And so from that day forth, we've always had a victorious, you know, celebration of our way of letting the whole country know that when it does come to your grassroots and your identity and taking of your land, we all will stand up and fight. So that's why we have the Orme Dam celebration.
During the years of 1971 through 1981, the Yavapai community at Fort McDowell were all saddened by the prospect of Orme Dam. It lowered many people's hopes and dreams for the future and coming generations. But because they are people of the land, they fought for their land from the youngest child to the oldest elder, and they won their freedom.
Our people will, in the future, will have no place to live. There'll be millions of dollars in their hands, but that will be just, say, might just fly out their hands, but the land will always be there. So that's the way we think today. It is for the future that we are thinking, not the present or the past. We want our future generation to have a place to live. That when I look back over the history of the American Indians and the way they were treated the last 200 years, it makes me mad that I want to go out and dig up my tomahawk, but I don't remember where I buried it. But I want to tell this to Goldwater, that I'm still looking for that tomahawk. And when I find it, Mr. Goldwater, your scalp will be hanging in my teepee.